Hello and welcome to Just Onside. I'm your host for today's episode, Uwais Ahmed, and I am joined by the man who, if you keep watching until the very end, he'll be doing a segment where he's providing next week's lottery numbers as well. You did guess it. You didn't go that far out on a limb, but you did guess it.
Oh yes, called it. I don't know what round I called it, but I knew it was going to happen. The curse was lifted, and the right team won the Champions League.
Hard to disagree.
Hmm.
Hard to disagree. Just before we jump in, because there is obviously the big game Saturday night for us to cover. Again, normally we'd be joined by Badge on the episode, but he's still busy changing those nappies that you spoke about. Ayub, he's
he
really
he ain't changing no nappies. I'm telling you, man's gone AWOL.
I was gonna say he's jumped knee deep into this father malarkey, but he might be knee deep in something else. But anyway, we hopefully he'll be back for the next episodes. Again, no coincidence that it's Manchester City winning trophy after trophy, and Badge has gone AWOL. I promise. Right. Anyway, just before we start, Ayub, as always, if you a little plea to our viewers, if you haven't subscribed already, give the channel a subscribe, give the episode a like. And again, press that bell to be notified of future content and drop a comment in the comments section below. Ayub, let's dive straight in because I've been looking forward to this episode even before Saturday night's game. Saturday night, we had Manchester City taking on Inter Milan in the Champions League final in Turkey and Istanbul, looking to complete a historic treble. A lot of nerves, a lot of anticipation going into the game on both sides. In the end, Manchester City prevailing 1-0 in quite a tense affair. Very watchable, but incredibly tense. I'll give you the floor. What were your thoughts on the game itself? And again, do you think the best team won in the end?
Yeah, you were right. It was a tense game. A lot riding on it, so it was quite predictable. I mean, I suppose there shouldn't have been any surprises. Inter Milan were always going to have quite a structured way of playing. I think they were extremely cohesive. I think they were incredibly well organized. I can't say that I've seen Manchester City look reasonably ordinary. I mean, I don't mean that in a negative way. I think it was just that Inter were just at it from minute one. They very rarely give City any space, which was to be expected. And I think the game plan was quite straightforward. It was just keeping it tight. I think the intention was keep it tight, keep it tight. Hopefully, on a break or show a moment of quality, you score 1-0, and that's game over. And I did think that. I thought if Inter scored first, I think I said it in the last podcast, that if Inter score first, I expect them to win the game. And I genuinely think that they would have won the game because I think they were an extremely difficult side to break through. City really struggled. I think they were in the ascendancy. I think there was one team that really were on the front foot. Not to say that Inter were passive, but I think their game plan was just to stifle, to limit the space, and it worked beautifully. It worked really, really well. And it perhaps did need a moment of magic or a moment of absolute quality, and perhaps a player that we weren't expecting to provide that sort of quality in terms of scoring goals, but magnificent. A player that I've absolutely loved watching all season, Rodri. So quality finish, and I think quite deserved to be honest, really, because I think they were the side that were the better side of the two. And then a little bit of fun and drama at the end. Our friend Lukaku doing what he does incredibly well. He should have scored. He should have scored. There is absolutely no excuses. A striker. I mean, I was going to say of that quality, but there are people who obviously question his quality. But a player of that ability, he should be hitting the corners. He shouldn't be hitting straight at the keeper. So a little bit of drama at the end, but deservedly, it was. It would have been again a travesty if City hadn't won that game. But full respect and credit to Inter Milan. I think they came with a game plan, and as I said earlier, it's very rare that you see City looking. I won't say bereft of ideas, but they looked quite ordinary for large parts of the game because it was really, really a struggle for them to actually perhaps get a clear-cut chance. But good game to watch. May not be a classic, but you don't expect it to be a classic in a game of such magnitude. But delighted that City won. But I predicted it.
You absolutely did. Yeah, and I think I do agree with your overall sentiment, by the way, especially the point regarding Inter Milan had they scored the first goal. At half time, I was texting a friend and I suggested the same thing, that it's the kind of game, having watched 45 minutes with Kevin De Bruyne also having gone off in the first half, that you felt Inter Milan, although to your point, they weren't in the ascendancy, that was very much Manchester City without dominating as they would normally do. It was the kind of game I felt that if Inter Milan somehow, through a set piece or through some counter-attacking situation, managed to get their noses in front, there was no real certainty in me that suggested that Manchester City could come back. It was just the way the game was developing, in terms of it being quite a tight affair. And although City, again, to your point, were largely in control in terms of the ball, I think Inter Milan, again, you emphasised it multiple times, and rightly so. They were their equals for the game for the most part, and that's as big a credit as we can give them. I think that going into the game, there was a lot of talk about Inter Milan's 3-5-2 formation, the fact that some teams that had employed such a formation had given Manchester City some challenges in the Premier League. There was some talk about Brentford having done the double. Now, I'm not necessarily going to read too much into that. The game at the Etihad was a very different affair to the game at Brentford, last game of the season, when they were obviously resting a lot of their players and a lot of the intensity wasn't quite there. But Spurs as well earlier in the season. So yeah, the 3-5-2 causes some challenges. Pep Guardiola spoke about it after the game in terms of John Stones being the spare man and how they wanted to get him a little bit more on the ball. Again, another player who I thought had an incredible final and has been riding this form for quite some time since this kind of introduction. And you've waxed lyrical, rightly so, about his form in the previous, in this kind of last stanza of the season. But yeah, lots been made of this formation. I think early on what you saw was Kevin De Bruyne drifting left towards Grealish's side and trying to get this extra number in midfield, whereas actually some of their best moments were when De Bruyne was a little bit more central and closer to Haaland and Gundogan. Let's say you saw that chance that they created for Haaland. Again, Gundogan and De Bruyne behind the midfield line. Quick 1-2 De Bruyne into Haaland. That's why you want De Bruyne 10 yards, 15 yards behind Haaland, slipping the ball through. So I think they slightly, although I give Inter a lot of credit, I thought City slightly, they were making it a little bit easier. Their passing was slow, lacking intensity. It was very much risk-averse passing, and that's where I think it helped Inter Milan a lot. They produced these kind of diamond formations everywhere, so they always had this kind of four-man kind of diamond, no matter where Manchester City had the ball. So the angles weren't quite there to kind of cut through them consistently. So yeah, Inter Milan deserve a lot of credit, and I think just as the game continued, first half there were some nervous moments. Ederson. You saw when Barella had that kind of attempt from away from. There were definitely a few nervous moments from City early on. They had that chance through Haaland and Bernardo Silva, but I think at halftime 0-0, one couldn't really complain. And I think going into the second half, to your point, it needed something, and you weren't sure where it was going to come from. You had that situation, which I think was before the goal, when Akanji. I do think it was at 0-0, if memory serves, where he left the ball for Ederson, and Martinez kind of went through from a very tight angle, difficult to score, could have cut it back. It wasn't on. And then to your point about the situation for the goal, and what's really interesting watching the goal multiple times is it was the kind of situation that City could not create throughout the entire game. And what it took was a really unusual piece of football. They had the ball over the top to Gundogan. He ended up on the byline, and the whole Inter Milan team slightly drifted towards the left-hand side of the pitch, if you watch carefully. And he then plays it back to Foden, who comes backwards, attracting multiple Inter players to him. He then plays it into Akanji. And what happened was, just if you freeze frame it when Akanji gets the ball, a lot of the Inter Milan midfielders are towards the left-hand side of the pitch, which meant that Akanji just had this kind of vacuum, this space to kind of run into. And to his credit, he attacks the space. And Bastoni, for the first time all game, very disciplined, very structured. But because those midfielders had been dragged to the left, he comes out to approach Akanji. Akanji slips it in behind. And that's when you know you're in trouble. When you've got your winger going towards the byline, the entire Inter Milan team is kind of facing their goal, slightly out of shape, cut back, deflection. You've got those midfielders running on. And again, it was just one of those kind of, I wouldn't even call it a lack of concentration. It's just the way the move developed that it just slanted the pitch towards the left from an Inter Milan perspective. And again, Manchester City absolutely take advantage knowing how to do it. And Rodri, look, he's a player that we had in our team of the season. He's had an incredible year for Manchester City. He goes from strength to strength. I believe he is the best defensive midfielder in the Premier League. And I just think he goes from strength to strength in terms of he's popping up with crucial moments. Last season, when they were trailing 2-1 to Aston Villa at the Etihad, cut back from Zinchenko, bang, 22, 23 yards out bottom corner to get him that 2-2 goal to give him time to get the winner, which they inevitably did through Gundogan. This year, again, Bayern Munich quarterfinals, first leg, again, relatively nervy affair, but he gets that first goal with the left foot strike from outside the box into the top corner. And he won't score a bigger goal than that in his career, you would imagine, scoring the winner in the Champions League final. So he stepped up in these kind of crucial moments. So again, I'm glad that he had his moment. He's a player that has really grown on me and is a superb player. And to your point, Ayub, I mean, those moments at the end, I mean, unbelievable. You've got first the DiMarco header onto the bar. He tries to loop it over first, so that's quite cute in some sense. Got a little bit too much on it. Then obviously trying to power a header through. Lukaku's there to kind of block it. Is it going in? I'm not 100% convinced. The City player.
Yeah. I think that was. I don't really consider that an opportunity missed. I think the header as well that you talked about. I think that's the only thing that he really could have done, a loopy header. And really, I suppose with those, it's one where I think if it goes in, it's extremely fortuitous. But I think there was a chance right at the end. Was it a save by Edison? It was. I'm trying to sort of think. There was
from the
right
corner
at the end. Yeah. So a little bit of drama. I mean, I think there are some people who are sort of saying that maybe Inter should have been a lot more offensive. I think they were aware. I think Inzaghi was aware that the better football side was Manchester City. And sometimes you've got to just respect that really, if you try and outplay a side which is the best team in the world, maybe you're going to come unstuck. So maybe the tactics were right, and the tactics were executed unbelievably well. They really, really were. And even I think you alluded to the point as well. I don't think you can necessarily say that the goal was strewn with errors. It really was maybe a slight piece of fortune, a little bump here, there, and a quality finish. But they were incredible. I thought the discipline that Inter Milan showed. I think the organisation, the effort that every single player put in. I mean that it sort of demonstrated why Inter Milan have conceded so few goals. I mean, we talked about it last time that the only time the anomaly was against Benfica when they conceded 3. But apart from that, they're a very, very difficult side to break, and you could see why. It was they had the opportunities right at the end. As I said, the Lukaku one, I don't know. I mean, it's if I'm a striker, I'd be devastated if I've hit it straight at the keeper. You really should be going for the corner. So he'll be ruining that.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the big one, wasn't it? I mean, yes, the DiMarco one was a little bit of drama added onto it by the commentary, which was amazing. Just, I love that. In big moments, the commentator, I think, also had significant value. So you've got the DiMarco situation, and then you're right, 88th minute, I think it is, if memory serves, the cross comes in. Goossens wins a wonderful strong header at the far post, does exactly what he should be doing, sending it back where it came from with power. I think the only thing that will disappoint Lukaku, and look, he had those moments in the World Cup. He's had a lot of other big situations, Europa League, Super Cup, where things have gone wrong for him, own goals and what have you. So there is something that just kind of follows him around. And in some ways, I feel a little sorry for him because I think there's a lot of kind of unpleasant criticism out there. And I think in terms of the chance, I think the fact he's in the middle of the goal, I think he's found it hard to kind of pivot his head, or swivel his head, I should say, kind of towards the corner, if that makes sense. I think he's concentrated so much on getting good contact. The only thing I would say is a lot of people, at least this is my assessment, a lot of people that were around me obviously didn't necessarily give Edison that much credit because they feel like the ball simply just hit him. But if you watch incredibly carefully, he makes this kind of little the tiniest adjustment just as the ball's about to hit him. And I think maybe somebody else there with slightly slower reactions, they might end up hitting him and going in. And there's this kind of, it's not even kind of visible, but he makes the smallest adjustment just as the ball's about to hit him, where I think he's positioned his leg. Again, I'm not saying he's done it voluntarily, but I think that just the sheer quickness of reflex has meant that he's got his leg in the exact position that it needs to be, let's say, for it to kind of ricochet outwards as opposed to, let's say, in. And then obviously you need a bit of luck with the Diaz ricochet and header. Again, give him credit as well that he's not sent that back into the goal. But what drama, that's what you want. I mean, if that corner goes in, a little bit similar to the Drogba goal against Bayern Munich in terms of that near post flicked header that you expect. Oh, wow. Imagine if that goes in. But I think on the whole, Manchester City, they've had moments in this run of theirs in Champions League. And what I mean is in the last 3, 4, 5 years where on the whole, a lot of knowledgeable people have said they're the best team in Europe. They've just not won the competition to kind of prove that to be the case undisputedly. And we've said this many a times that if you keep knocking and if you keep playing consistently, at some point that's going to open up. Were they consistently or were they massively better than Inter Milan on the day? Absolutely not. I thought Inter Milan were their equals, and I think nobody could have. And Simone Inzaghi spoke about it. Nobody could have complained if that went to extra time. But I'm kind of pleased that they got their moment, Manchester City, in a lot of ways, because it's one of the best teams that I've seen in my lifetime. And I think they're well worthy of being champions of Europe because it's a brand of football orchestrated by a coach in world football that's obviously well renowned now, world famous, arguably takes his place in history. But it makes sense in terms of telling the story of football and Champions League that Manchester City should be champions of Europe, at least for me anyway.
Absolutely, I agree. And I think it's always the case, isn't it, really, that you want a team that plays football. Not to say that Inter Milan can't play football, but on that evening, the intention for Inter Milan was to stop Manchester City. So therefore, I'm always, I like teams with the intention, right, we're going to go and win the game rather than, right, we're going to stop the opposition. So I think from a pure point of view, I'm delighted that Manchester City won. Plus, also, I think if you're the best team in the world, it's fitting that you win the most acclaimed trophy as well. So I'm just delighted, and it just gives Guardiola, I suppose. I mean, I'm one of his critics because I've always said that he should have won the Champions League. He should have won the Champions League more times than he has with Manchester City. So at least now, I won't sort of say he's put it to bed, but at least he can say, well, look, I have won it. I've got the best team. I've spent huge amounts of money, but at least I've won the Champions League, which is perhaps always what the intention was for Guardiola. So I'm delighted, absolutely delighted. And it proved me right as well, which was also important.
A little bonus. Yeah, no, agreed. And I think, look, he deserves immense credit because of the way he's evolved this team. And there'll be many who says, well, if you buy if you buy as many great players as he has, and he has bought some great players, but he's also improved players. He's made those players into absolute beasts, consistently performing at the peak of their powers. But I think the way he's evolved this team, he spoke about it at full time about the 4 centre backs, the fact they enjoy defending a little bit more. They're a little bit more stubborn, and that's been borne out in kind of the goal difference as well. They've been just as lethal up front, but just as stingy at the back as well. And they're an incredibly well-oiled machine in terms of optimizing defense with attack. So, yeah, look, they are well-worthy champions of Europe. They are the best team in Europe. They'll start next year as favourites, deservedly so, you would think. And if this manager stays at Manchester City for the next 2, 3, 4 years, there's no guessing how many potential more Champions Leagues they could win, because they will start again as favourites, at least for me, in the future competition. So yeah, well deserved for Manchester City. Commiserations to Inter Milan. It's funny because on the last episode we both said, didn't we? I mean, you were probably more bullish than I was in terms of prior to the last episode, but I think we both came to a consensus that it'd probably be quite a tight game, one fraught with nerves, and I felt that was always going to play into Inter Milan's kind of benefit, the fact that City were a little risk averse, understandably so. But yeah, they deserve plaudits. And look, I think if they came up against a lot of other teams, I still think, let's say if Real Madrid made it through the bracket, I mean, it's easy for people to say, oh, Real would have beaten Inter, but that kind of stubborn team deserves credit,
Mm.
and I think they would have given any team coming out of that side, whether it was Chelsea, Bayern Munich, Real, I think they would have given them some problems in the final, just because, like you said, incredibly organised. So manager deserves credit, Simone Inzaghi, as do Inter Milan, and it'll be interesting to see how they fare next year as they go on. Right, so we've put that to bed, Ayub. Manchester City, we've given them their flowers.
Rightly so.
Rightly so. Well, you've been giving them their flowers.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's this is not a surprise to me at all. I mean, we could have done this show last week.
Yeah, recorded it before the game. But yeah, moving on. There's been a lot of talk, and we steered clear of it for valid reasons with regards to the treble. But there's been a lot of talk this week now that Manchester City have won the treble this season by winning the Premier League, FA Cup, and Champions League, their first in their history there. How does this compare? How does this compare to the Manchester United treble of '99? Which team's better? Which treble's better? And what have you? So again, we've wanted to cover this topic since probably at least a couple of weeks. But again, it was probably disrespectful to cover it, I think, before it happened. So I'd like to just get your thoughts. What's your overall assessment of that comparison? Who is, in your opinion, and it is your opinion only, the better team? Which treble was better? How do you analyze it? How do you view it in terms of these two teams? And again, it's the two big rivals in Manchester as well that we're comparing.
Yeah, and I think you're right to point out it is my opinion. So just for the viewers who are watching this and listening to this, it's my opinion. So it either it's something you agree with or you disagree with, but it's an opinion. I'm going to talk about the league first, in terms of the league that Man United won, the league that Manchester City won. In a sense, I mean, there is a similarity because both teams were competing against the Arsenal. The Arsenal of 1999, I consider a stronger side. They were a powerful side. And it was a cracking, from memory. I mean, it went right down to the wire. I think they won by a point. I think if memory serves me right, they won by a point. And I think the last game of the season as well, it was where if United had lost and then Arsenal win, I think Arsenal win the league, if memory serves me right. So it was a cracking campaign. And I think that's what I remember about Manchester United of that era under Ferguson. It was that never say die attitude. It was Fergie time. We're all sort of aware of Fergie time. And it was a side that never knew that they were beaten. I think the competition that they had with regards to the Arsenal at the time, it was ferocious. I think the battles between the two, was Pizzagate in that year? I don't know, because I remember.
No.
Oh, was that much later on?
Yeah.
All right, but it was always epic. The one thing I always remember, and to have two titanic warriors, Roy Keane and Patrick Vieira. I mean, it was not for the faint-hearted. So certainly in terms of accomplishment, I think anybody to have beaten that Arsenal side to the league title, tremendous kudos. Because as I said, that Arsenal side was one of the best sides. I think they were still, I mean, in terms of the Invincibles, I presume a lot of the players sort of went on, I presume, to be part of the Invincible side. I'm not too sure. I'd like to sort of go through the players, but obviously we're talking about an Arsenal side which was unbelievable. It was an exceptional side. So for me, it was an unbelievable accomplishment by Manchester United. This season, Manchester City, you can probably turn around and sort of say the same, that in a sense, they've had to come from behind. But I think most people always presume that at some stage, Arsenal would perhaps feel the pressure. I won't quite sort of say will, but they'll certainly at some stage stumble. So was it a surprise? I don't think it was. I think if you ask most people, even when Arsenal had, was it an 8-point lead? I think if you ask most people,
having played a game extra.
Yes, so you keep on adding that. You keep on slipping that in. But I still say that a lot of people perhaps still thought that Manchester City were perhaps they'd keep on winning. I think the mindset certainly was that Manchester City will keep on winning. Arsenal will perhaps falter, and it's exactly what happened. And I just don't think that this Arsenal side is as good as the Arsenal side of 1999. So I think in terms of direct competition, I think what Manchester United had to do in 1999 was a little bit harder. I think they had a much more fiercer and a much more better opposition, a competitor for the crown. But that's not to diminish what Manchester City have done, because there were 8 points, but 5 points, I suppose, if you take away that game in hand. But still, it's a tough one in terms of, I suppose, just the league. I'd probably err on the side of, in terms of the league, the better side or the better accomplishment was Manchester United. In terms of the better footballing side, it sounds like a contradiction, but I'd say it's probably Manchester City in terms of just an outright football side. But in terms of achievement, and maybe I suppose that's what we need to identify when we're doing this comparison. Are we just looking at which side is better, or perhaps are we trying to assess what is the better accomplishment? So in terms of accomplishment, I'd say Manchester United. In terms of maybe the better football side, shading it, Manchester City.
You're hedging your bets, are you? That's what you're doing.
This fence.
You're hedging your bets. I take time explaining exactly what the question is offline.
What was the question?
And then
you know,
online,
I never listened to the question.
And then you're always thinking, how can I mean, I've got a lot of United fans. I've got a lot of Manchester City fans to take care of. Always hedging your bets. Accomplishment, which team's the better one?
In the end, I will give my verdict. At the moment, okay. I'm still deciding. I'm still thinking.
You're still deciding, clearly.
I need to hear myself.
Have a guess at how many goals the Arsenal team that Manchester United were competing against in 1999 for the league title. Guess how many goals that Arsenal team conceded in 19 home matches at Highbury.
Okay. It's going to be a ridiculously low number, isn't it? I would sort of say it'll probably be a less than goal a game. So I'd say 17.
Try 5.
5. My goodness me.
Goals.
My goodness me. So that, again, that shows how terrifically sort of resilient that side was.
Well, on the basis that you made such a wishy-washy case, I'm trying to buffer your case. I'm only joking. No, look, I will give you. Let's cover the league first. Yeah, Manchester United in 1999. Let's not forget, Arsenal beat them in the league the year before. Manchester United that season at home won 14 games, drawn 4, just lost the 1 home match. Goal difference of 45 goals scored, 18 goals against. Away from home, however, they actually drew more games than they won. They drew 9 compared to 8 wins, also losing 2 games, finishing with a record of 22 wins, 13 draws, and 3 defeats. Complete goal difference of 80 goals scored and 37 goals against, 43 goal difference plus. Just a 79 points, however, which seems a world away when you think about some of the titles won in the last 10 to 15 years. Perhaps you're right, Arsenal were their competitors. They beat out Arsenal that season by 1 point. Arsenal finished 1 goal difference behind them with a plus 42 compared to Manchester United's plus 43. And as I mentioned, Arsenal were incredibly stingy at home, conceding 5 goals at home. In terms of the comparison with Manchester City's title, it's funny actually, because Manchester City, when I compare the treble, there's a lot of factors that I took into account. One is obviously, I guess degree of difficulty does come into it, but I guess the style, the overall your dominance, I think comes into it as to how dominant the team was. And I think in the end, you're also looking at in terms of which team's better as well. What do your eyes tell you? If the teams play 10 times, who's winning? You know, the majority of the times, that kind of thing. So comparing it to the Manchester City this season, again, Manchester United's goal difference, what was it, plus 45 or whatever it was. City goal difference this season, plus 61. Points 89 compared to Manchester United, 79. At home, won 17 games to Manchester United's 14. having only lost once at home, the famous game home to Brentford. Brentford obviously did the double over them, having scored 60 goals at home. 60. That's compared to 45 at home for Manchester United. City again away from home, 11 wins, 4 draws, 4 defeats compared to United's 8 wins, 9 draws, 2 defeats. In terms of the competition, I think there is something left in our. Yeah, they beat Arsenal in the end by 5 points, and I won't harp on that too much. I think they might well beat Brentford if they're playing at full intensity and full in that final game. So look, the points gap is what the points gap is. The Arsenal team this season got more points than the Arsenal team that season when they were battling Manchester United. I look at the numbers, points, goal difference, wins, the football. I think where Manchester United 100% rival City is what you said, the mental strengths, just in terms of never say die attitude. That what they had, that's one of my first memories of football. This team just does not lose or does not know when it's beaten. But yeah, I was 13 at the time. It's again one of my, I want to say best memories, but let's just say it's one of the lasting ones in terms of what Alex Ferguson was able to do with that team year in, year out. But just in terms of the overall league campaign, as much as that season, because of the huge rivalry at that time between United and Arsenal, I think that definitely lives longer in the memory, perhaps, because I think any sporting memory requires some sort of, I don't want to say competition, but some sort of rivalry, some sort of storyline. And there were huge storylines. You mentioned Keane, Vieira, and many, many others. Those two teams were each other's equals during those years. So they were really going at it for all the big trophies. So I have to give the nod to Manchester City only on the basis that I think in terms of the league campaign, they had the more impressive league campaign, finishing off with God knows how many wins in a row until they obviously lost against Brentford. But yeah, I mean, I know they drew away to Brighton, but again, the trophy was in the bag. So again, how much stock do we put into those games? But I think overall on the league campaign, based on numbers, based on the football, based on their overall dominance in the league against their opposition, I would definitely have to give the nod from a league campaign to Manchester City, at least for me. Yeah, what's your?
That's fair enough, I suppose. I mean, you've made a strong argument. I in sport, it's always about competition, and I think it's very easy sometimes to perhaps just say, well, look, they're the better side. They've got better players. They won the league at a canter, and maybe there is an argument for that. But I'm one where it's about challenges. It's about rivalries, and it's something that I can't underestimate, because I think what United had in '99, as I said, I mean, those, if it was one of the, it was an Arsenal side, a ferocious Arsenal side. I think it really was like going into war. I mean, I don't want to belittle warfare, but really it was a battle. I mean, I mean, I touched upon the Vera and the Keane, but there were battles all over the place. It was a game not for the faint-hearted. And as I said, to be better than that Arsenal side took an incredible amount of ability and mental fortitude as well. Have Manchester City had to show the same mental fortitude to win the league? I don't think so. I think it's been at the end, it's been quite a canter. Now, apart from the Arsenal, I'm not too sure whether there was any competition at all. I mean, in fact, I know there was no competition at all. I'm not sure exactly how the league table was in 1999, but I do know Leeds finished fourth.
Leeds finished fourth, Chelsea finished third. Only a few points behind Arsenal, to be fair. Chelsea.
Yeah, so maybe I suppose we put Chelsea into that mix as well. So it was perhaps a lot harder. There was a lot more stronger competition, and the Chelsea side as well. I suppose. I mean, you probably know some of the players who were playing at the time, but it was a Chelsea side that was getting stronger and stronger and stronger. Eventually, that Chelsea side obviously had a period of dominance. So, in terms of overall achievement, I'd probably sort of say now, looking back, I'd probably say in terms of league, maybe it's Manchester United.
The only thing I would say to that, and why I will dig in even more, is to your point about Chelsea. Yeah, Roman came in 4 years later, and then obviously the whole world changed for Chelsea Football Club. But I think you're perhaps giving a lot more credence, perhaps to. I don't want to come across disrespectful, so let me rephrase. I think Manchester United were slightly closer to the pack, and that's why it feels like they were, let's say, they beat off obviously men's competition. And I also think that because Manchester City, it felt inevitable to the majority of football observers that they were going to reel in Arsenal. I think we don't give them enough credit for the mental pressure that they put on Arsenal by the fact that they won all those games in a row at the end to reel in Arsenal. So I think it's actually the fact that Manchester United weren't that far ahead from Arsenal, let's say that season, just from talent to talent, let's say. And yes, they won in the end by 1 point, 79 points to 78. I just think Manchester City are that much more superior and reeled in Arsenal. I think that makes it look like big. It's like as if we take their greatness for granted because we think it's inevitable that they're going to reel in Arsenal. And when they do, we think, they've not had much of a challenge. It's because it's rare for a team to just put together 12, 13 wins in a row, or whatever it was. So, look, I think Manchester City are the better team. They had the more impressive league campaign. And I do believe that if you plugged it, and the only thing I would say, I think, to counteract my own point before we move on quickly is, I think the difficult thing with these comparisons is there's so much that has evolved in 23, 24 years. So I think you've got to be fair. I want to be fair to Manchester United. It's not as if, what I'm saying is kind of football recruitment and everything's just moved on, technology development, nutrition. You know what I mean? It's not as simple as just saying which team's better. There's been a lot more emphasis on obviously technical ability and strategy and what have you. So I'm not just simply comparing like for like. I just think that Manchester City were the more impressive outfit when it comes to the Premier League campaign. I won't bring the other seasons into it because that's not what we're doing. But I think this year, 89 points, again, giving up that last game, even to 2 games, I would argue, once they had it in the bag and they were fighting in other competitions. But otherwise, they would have put up 90, let's be clear. But yeah, at least for me, City, the more impressive league campaign. Moving on, otherwise, the ghost of Badge will be pointing to his clock somewhere. FA Cup, and then let's just quickly go through this. If it's okay for you, I'll go first on this just very quickly.
Yeah, you go for it.
United in the FA Cup in 1999, home matches against Middlesbrough, Premier League opposition, beat them 3-1. Home to Liverpool, tough game, home, beat them 2-1. Home to Fulham, Fulham a non-league, a non-Premier League, I should say. At the time, they beat them 1-0. Then 2 games against Chelsea, drew at home, away to Chelsea, York Brace. Dwight York Brace gives them the 2-0 win at Stamford Bridge. Then obviously the big games against Arsenal, Aston Villa, the quarterfinal, the semi-final, I should say, the first leg at Villa Park, 0-0. They then come a few days later to play the second game. You probably can remember where you were. I can remember where I was. Unbelievable.
I can, but I can't say. I'm not going to disclose where I was.
That's a segment for another show. Definitely not just Onside. But anyway, no, look, we all remember the game. A little bizarre that we should have 2 legs for a game that's played on a neutral venue. But anyway, we digress. Unbelievable game, that semi-final. Is probably, if they didn't have the moment in Barcelona in terms of the 2 goals in stoppage time, that is probably the most iconic game goal, not just for Manchester United that season, but probably for a decade, if not multiple decades. I mean, we just remember that goal from Giggs. But incredible effort by Manchester United to overcome Arsenal. Obviously, once it goes to 1-1 after Beckham and Bergkamp had made it 1-1. Keane gets sent off famously for the challenge on Overmars. Ray Parlour wins the penalty on Philip Neville's late challenge, 91st, 92nd minute. Dennis Bergkamp has a chance to put them through to the final against Newcastle. Schmeichel saves. The rest, as they say, is history. What an unbelievable goal from Ryan Giggs. No doubt some of those Arsenal defenders will be still having nightmares about how he kind of just coaxed and jinxed past them. And then obviously in the final, and I think where our final against Newcastle, they beat them 2-0. I think Sheringham and Scholes. I think the challenge for Manchester United, I will say, is that final was played on a Saturday, and then the Champions League final in those days was played on the following Wednesday. And I think that's important to mention because although there were some enforced changes, because obviously famously Roy Keane and Paul Scholes couldn't play the Champions League final, so therefore they were always going to play the FA Cup final, they also had to make some decisions. Five of the starters, I should say, that started the FA Cup final didn't start the Champions League final, so he had to rotate a little bit. If I remember correctly, Solskjaer started. He made the decision to start Janssen, although Janssen also started in the Champions League final. David May started because Jaap Stam had a little bit of a niggle, let's say. So Jaap Stam had to miss the Champions League final. I don't know if he made the bench. I'll have to double check that. But the point is, there was some element of rotation that you had to consider, to the extent where, because Nicky Butt was always going to have to play the Champions League final because of Keenan Scholes' absence, he kept Butt out of the squad altogether, just on the basis that he didn't want to risk him. So there were some tough decisions to make for Sir Alex Ferguson going into that final, where they obviously won 2-0. Again, York on the bench. Solskjaer started with Cole in the final, again, if memory serves. So I think a good FA Cup run, played some tough opposition, just the one, again, non-Premier League team in that run. Got to give a massive credit, overcame some difficult obstacles to have to win away to Chelsea. We discussed it. They finished third that season, to finish, to beat Arsenal in such a memorable fashion. And again, iconic moment. So no doubt about it. I'm not going to take anything away from that. And again, the added variable of having to make some tough decisions with regards to the FA Cup final selection. You then look at Manchester City this season, just very quickly, and then I'll give you the floor. They beat Chelsea at home. Yes, Chelsea have had a difficult season in the third round of the FA Cup, 4-0. They drubbed them. Home to Arsenal, when Arsenal were absolutely flying high. Quite a tight game, to be fair. Nathan Ake scored, if you remember, famously on that. I think it was a Friday night game. I'll have to double check. Home to Arsenal, 1-0. Away to Bristol City. They then play three non-Premier League opposition. Away to Bristol City, 3-0. Home to Burnley, 6-0. Home to Sheffield United, 3-0. What I would say is that Burnley and Sheffield United obviously have got promoted this season. So they were teams that were at least the next best teams, let's say, from the Championship. And then obviously in the final, famously, just a week or so ago, they've got obviously the brace from Gundogan beating their rivals, Manchester United. They've only conceded one goal in the FA Cup that season. They had a goal difference this season of 19-1 in the FA Cup. Yes, again, aided by the fact they played three teams, probably not from the Premier League. But I think in terms of the degree of difficulty, I'd probably just have to give the nod to Manchester United with regards to the FA Cup, just because of the level of opposition they've played. They've had to go to replays for Chelsea, replays to Arsenal, playing at Villa Park, and then the slight challenge of having to navigate team selection, although some of it was enforced. Again, I think Dennis Irwin missed the FA Cup final because he was suspended from a Premier League game. I think he picked up a yellow card or red card against Liverpool, so he missed the FA Cup final, ready for the Champions League. So some decisions made themselves, is what I'm saying. But I think from a degree of difficulty, and maybe because it's a little bit more memorable, I'd probably have to give the nod to Manchester United in terms of just that run.
Fair enough. And that's exactly, you've just, I suppose, hit the nail on the head, or at least the way that I'm looking at it. What I did was, it would have been too easy if we'd have just said who's the best side in terms of pure ability. It's Manchester City, I think, quite straightforward. But I was looking at this as, right, how are we going to try and judge who is the better side? Or is that what we're looking at? Or is it more a case of the accomplishments? What is much more memorable in terms of what's been achieved in 1999 and 2023? So that's the lens that I'm looking at it. So in terms of the cup, you've perfectly sort of described exactly my sentiments, exactly the games that United had to play. I mean, you touched upon the game against Liverpool, and again, if memory serves me right, it was I think Owen scored quite early doors. York then equalised, I think, 85th, 86th, 87th minute, so it's quite late on. And then I think Solskjaer scores a winner. So again, it's a game that they were a few minutes away from being knocked out. And I think, again, that's the storyline. That's the thread that runs through 1999. This never say die attitude, this we will play until the 94th, 95th minute. This absolute hunger, desire, in a sense, it sort of manifests itself from Ferguson. Ferguson obviously instilled in his troops this idea, this real sort of warrior-like spirit, and the cup run absolutely typified that mentality. I mean, the game against the Arsenal, it's as good a cup game as I think you'll ever see. It had everything, the drama, there was quality, there was a bit of nonsense, as there always are between the two sides, but wonderful, wonderful. And again, it's you'd think they're down and out. 1-1, Keano gets sent off, and you think, curtains, penalty. Dennis Bergkamp, one of the finest football players that has graced the Premier League. But then he's against Peter Schmeichel, one of the best keepers, if not the best keeper that's ever kept in the Premier League. Super, what drama. And then the iconic Ryan Giggs. They're all sort of waving of the shirt. They're all hairy chest. Fantastic, iconic. And you're absolutely right. In terms of the accomplishment, hands down, United, hands down. I think City almost, if you could pick your opponents for the cup to make it easy, City had it. You've
they beat Arsenal. I mean, they always beat Arsenal, but just say.
I mean, that's the one. But Manchester United had tough game after tough game, apart from obviously the Fulham game. But it was tough game after tough game, and then the semi-final against the nemesis, the arch rivals, the Arsenal. So fantastic accomplishment, wonderful, wonderful. So this is quite clear for me. It's United on that.
This is the one that's perhaps most interesting. Champions League. So yeah, 99 in the end, Manchester United triumph over Bayern Munich in, again, one of the most iconic Champions League finals of all time. Obviously, we've just discussed Manchester City triumphing over Inter Milan in this year's final just a few days ago. What's your overall assessment, Ayub, in terms of the Champions League campaigns of both teams? And then I'll obviously give you my thoughts, and then perhaps let's summarize as to where we stand with regards to which is the most impressive treble, but also which is the best team. But I'm keen to hear your thoughts with regards to the Champions League. So go on.
Again, I mean, it typified the season for Manchester United in terms of the games that they had. I think the group was Brøndby, Barca, and Bayern in the group.
Correct.
The game that stands out, there's two games. Obviously, the final stands out, but against Juventus, I think they needed to win the game at Juventus by. Was it had to be?
It was 1-1 in the first leg. It was 1-1 in the first leg.
So really, I suppose anything, a draw over 1-1, obviously, but they were losing 2-0 against Juventus. To come back, not only to draw the game, but to win the game, and Juventus, I mean, to get a result in Italy at that time, as it probably is now as well, was incredibly difficult. And again, it's an act of Houdini. I mean, to be 2 down at Juventus at the Champions League semi-final, to then sort of to turn that around and to win the game, again, that just embodies the whole spirit of Manchester United under Ferguson at that time. So you think, wow, can it get any better than that? Of course it can. Against Bayern in the final. I mean, I don't need to. Everybody knows exactly what happened in that final, and they were battered. They were battered. I remember the Champions League final very well. If there was any justice, Bayern would have won, hands down. It's almost as if they deserved the good fortune. I think for all the efforts they'd put in, and bearing in mind, it's very famous, the 10 days in May. That, I think, was 10 days later from obviously winning the league. So in a sense, it's quite condensed. And you talked about the FA Cup at the time. The Champions League was midweek. So the work that Ferguson did was unbelievable. Fantastic management in terms of, right, who do I rest, who do I play? Also bearing in mind that 2 gun players, we're talking about Keane and Scholes. I mean, these are the 2 guys that you pencil in straight away. They were missing. So amidst all that adversity, to then be, was it 89 minutes, 90 minutes to be virtually, I think, I mean, it's almost, I still remember, I think the Bayern fans, I think the Bayern management, some of the players were almost in celebratory mode. And then 2 or 3 minutes of unbelievable drama. And again, it's just absolutely fantastic. It will live long in the memory, I think, for generations to come. So unbelievable accomplishment for Manchester City. I'm not going to talk about every single round. The game that just blew me away was against Real Madrid at the Bernabeu. Not at the Bernabeu, and then the return fixture at the Etihad. That was just, it was. They made Real Madrid look like a championship side at the Etihad. This is a world-class side. That performance, it just was unbelievable. It was a team at the absolute peak of their powers. It was, if any team ever deserved to win a Champions League just based on one performance, that was it. They did fantastically well at the Bernabeu, but what they did at the Etihad was unbelievable. That was the best performance I have ever seen in the Champions League, bearing in mind the opposition. The final, again, excellent final in terms of playing against a team that was, we've talked about it, so we don't need to go through it, but excellent performance, excellent result, and deserved Champions League winner. In terms of drama, it's easy to say Manchester United, but I think for the performance alone against Real, I'm going for Manchester City.
Interesting. I'm surprised that you arrived at that conclusion, but I do, in the end, concur. And I think it's important just to give a little bit of context and also underline the point that you made about Manchester United. I think the storyline of 99 in a lot of ways was the highlighting of the very resilience that team had. I took the liberty of watching all the knockout games, extended highlights, obviously, not the whole games. I've not got that much time, but
hardcore, my friend, hardcore.
Of the Inter Milan games in the quarterfinals, the Juventus games, and also the Bayern Munich game. And it's just, it permeates through your screen of how desperate situations and diving for lost causes and the old cliche bodies on the line. And it really was to some extent. And you mentioned about the FA Cup game against Liverpool, and it was similar when you talk about the I think it was the Giggs equaliser away at home, I should say, to Juventus, again very late, a game which Juventus dominated at Old Trafford in the first half at least. I think, look, in terms of the Champions League, let's just quickly go through it. United, if you remember, because they'd lost, they'd come second in the league the year before, they had to qualify for the Champions League. So they actually had to qualify. They played LKS Lodz, beat them 2-0. But you're right, they had Brøndby, Bayern Munich, and Barcelona in the group stages. And in those days, Ayub, there were only 6 groups. So 6 groups meant 6 winners, and then straight to the quarterfinals, which meant the 2 best second place teams out of those 6 groups would make it. So Manchester United won 2 of their group games. It won't be a surprise. It was the home and away game to Brøndby, where they beat them 11-2 on aggregate. But they then had the absolute humdingers against Barcelona, 3-3 home and away, and then Bayern Munich 2-2 away in Bayern Munich Stadium, and then 1-1 at home. So they actually qualified second behind Bayern Munich from the groups, but they went through on the as the best second teams alongside Real to form the last 8. So there was no last 16 round as there is now. Again, quarterfinals, they beat Inter Milan 2-0 at home and then 1-1 away from home. You might remember the famous save from Schmeichel from Ivan Zamorano's flying header. Again, one of the more iconic moments, let's say, of the Champions League. David Beckham in that Old Trafford game, again, I would encourage anyone to watch it. His crossing was on full display. Both assists came from his crosses, both technically unbelievable crosses, both different. One he had to dig out of his feet, one from the byline, slightly kind of running onto it. Unbelievable. he's up there in terms of kind of right pegs, as they say. Incredible. Then second game, obviously 1-1. Poor mistake from Roy Keane, but again, scores makes it 1-1 and ends that game. Inter Milan that season in the Serie A finished 8th. Just for context, they then go on to play Juventus. Juventus in the 1999 season, Ayub, they drew one game. They won one game in their groups and drew 5 games in a group of Galatasaray, Rosenborg, and Bilbao. So although they had some great players, Zidane, Inzaghi, Antonio Conte, they had an incredible team, Davids, Deschamps. They finished 7th that season in Serie A. And again, in the group stages, they finished. They won one game and drew 5. Yes, tight group, but they weren't blowing everyone away. So yes, at home at Old Trafford, Juventus were well on top at Old Trafford. Should have put the game to bed, arguably in the first game. But again, you mentioned United's resilience, comeback, finish it 1-1. Second game, 2-0 down early on in Inzaghi's brace, and then somehow in Turin, the famous, again, another iconic moment, Roy Keane flying header from the cross. And then they've obviously pulled it back there afterwards with York and Cole to finish that off. And then the Bayern Munich game. What's really surprising, Ayub, is the way you recollect the Bayern Munich game, because I don't disagree the fact that most people recollect the game being in that way. But actually, United had 61% possession. They had more shots, and they had like more chances created based on statistics that I saw. The reason is, but I don't disagree with your assessment. It's because when we think about the more tangible chances or the more obvious chances, we're thinking about the Mehmet Scholl, famously, he does that wonderful skill, chips Schmeichel, hits the post, comes back into Schmeichel's arms, the Yanker overhead kick. And United had a few situations, and I think Bayern Munich also conceded a bit of territory based on the fact that they were leading relatively early on from that Mario Basler free kick. So again, that's not to disagree with you, because that's how I remember it. It was just interesting when I saw the statistics that actually it was a relatively even game on the whole, although one should probably watch the whole 90 minutes to make a fair assessment 24 years on. But no, look, in the end, an incredible finish. And I think the Champions League for Manchester United that year, I don't know if you agree, but it was more the moments. It's what you remember. The Keane flying header, the Zamorano save by Schmeichel, the fact that they were both suspended, those two gun players that you speak about. But then injury time, Schmeichel goes up, sharing up. It's just, I mean, it's iconic. It's just there's no other word for it. You'll never forget it as long as you live. And regardless of the fact that Bayern Munich have won Champions League since then, it's the one that got away, right? Incredible. They had to obviously play Jesper Blomqvist in that game, play Beckham central midfield, Janssen at the back with Jaap Stam. But yeah, incredible. Their total goal difference that season, 29-16. 29 goals scored in the Champions League, 16 against. And just very quickly, in terms of running through Manchester City, if I may, just in the Champions League, group of Dortmund, Sevilla, Copenhagen. Let's not forget, Sevilla finished 3rd in that group. They went on to win the Europa League. They always win the Europa League. Their goal difference in the group stages, they won 4 games, drew 2. 1 away to Copenhagen, but their goal difference was 14 scored, 2 against. And then if you look at the run that they had, last 16, Leipzig, 8-1 aggregate, quarterfinals, Bayern Munich, 4-1 aggregate, semi-finals, Real Madrid, holders, 5-1 aggregate, and then obviously in the final, 1-0. Total goal difference in the knockout stages, plus 15, scored 18, 3 conceded. Total goals scored, 34, goals conceded, 5. I mean, Manchester City's run was utterly dominant. They looked like the best team from the very first game, and all they had to do was kind of consistently show that. They beat Bayern Munich in the quarterfinals, the team that would go on to win the Bundesliga. Yes, they've won it 10 times in a row. They beat Real, second leg, when a lot of people said, oh, where's this going to go? Even though Manchester City were favourites, and rightly so, they've put them to the sword, like you mentioned, in one of the most memorable performances in Champions League history. In beating them 4-0, and it could have, let's be honest, it should have been more. They absolutely pulverized them. I think 7 and 8 would have been more than a fair scoreline. And then obviously they've had to suffer in the final against a very game Inter Milan team. I think just overall assessment on the Champions League, when I've watched the games, obviously Man City, I've watched all of them, so I don't need to watch them again. Watching the United games just to kind of refresh the mind. What I would say is I think United's resilience is something that matches City, if not even perhaps supersedes that, because maybe Man City haven't had to maybe show that as much. I think maybe in games, or at least that's not the first thing you think about when you think about their DNA, whereas it is when you think about Manchester United's. But in terms of the Champions League, the win, United's was perhaps the more, not unlikely, but it felt like they had to produce these astonishing moments to really get through the next round, get through the next round, get through the next stage. Whereas City, they were just incredible from start to finish. So on the whole, I think just summarizing the three competitions we've just gone through, and I'm really keen to hear your overall assessment, what I would say is the better team is Manchester City, and that's no criticism of Manchester United. Again, this is just my opinion. I think it's difficult to compare teams 24 years apart. I think there's so much that's moved on in football. It's not even the same game to some extent. But I think Manchester City are the better team. My eyes tell me that. The record tells you that. The goal difference tells you that. The consistency and the disparity between them and their opposition tells you that. And I also think it's the more impressive treble, just from the stakes of excellence. Let's say I think it was consistently excellent in every competition, whereas I think United had more where they needed some moments, and they needed quite a lot of those to get through those situations, to get through those. And that's not to say that that's by luck, because that team manufactured their own luck. But I think on the whole, the better team is Man City. I think if they play it 10 times, they're winning 7 to 8, in my humble opinion. And I also think their treble is the more impressive. I don't want to go down the whole finances route, because that's a quagmire for another day, but I do think they are the better team, and it's the bigger, better treble achievement.
All right. I'm going to give my verdict slightly differently, because I think the better footballing side. So if they were to play a peak Man United 1999 playing a peak Manchester City 2023, you're probably right. On the whole, it's always going to be the Man City side. But sport is about competition, about accomplishments as well. And I think that's what I'm looking at, the accomplishments, rather than just who is the better side. I think the league, certainly for Manchester United, was harder to win. So it was much more, the accomplishment was better, in my opinion. Same with the FA Cup as well. I think what the challenges that they faced were much more difficult. The Champions League, in a funny sort of way, they had a great deal of fortune. So in a sense, luck played a huge part. As I said, from memory, the game against Bayern Munich should have been 2-3 up, out of sight. The game against Juve, 9 times out of 10, when you're playing Juventus away, if they're leading 2-0, you don't win that game, irrespective of who you are. So there was an element of good fortune for the Champions League, which is why I consider Manchester City's performance in the Champions League, because you are talking about the greatest club competition in the world. They were unbelievable. They were impeccable. And I focused on the game against Real Madrid for a reason, because it was the most complete performance you can imagine. And you are absolutely right. 4-0 was perhaps, it didn't flatter Manchester City. They could have been 5, 6, 7. And to do that to a side of such ability and the caliber of players, I mean, some could argue that maybe the legs weren't there. That's still a great side. So I think in terms of accomplishment, they deservedly were the Champions League winners, and they performed to a level which I don't think many clubs will be able to do in the future. So certainly in terms of the Champions League, absolutely no question. The accomplishment is Manchester City. So I'm basing it not on who's the better side, man for man, because that's Manchester City. But in terms of accomplishment, I put it 2 to Manchester United, 1 to Manchester City.
You can't split
there
the treble.
You go.
You can't split the treble.
No, I'm splitting it in the sense that it's 2-1. So therefore, my verdict of which is I'm not going to say the better side, because as soon as I say the better side, it's going to be warfare. People are just going to say, "Oh, no." the better accomplishment was Manchester United.
Yeah, I think, look, what I would say in conclusion to that is Manchester United overcame adversity on more than one occasion during that season. And that is a testament to their kind of mentality, to their character, to their coach, to the way they do not give in no matter what. Going down to 10 men against Arsenal in that FA Cup semi-final. Yes, the penalty is a bit of a lottery, but again, he dives the right way, makes a great save. You need moments of fortune, right? Manchester City had that this Saturday. You need moments of fortune to get your hands on the big prizes sometimes. Roy Keane often speaks about that. I think Manchester United had the unbelievable, unparalleled, unprecedented kind of ability to deal with moments of adversity in ways that not many teams since have. And I think you saw that at its absolute peak in 1999, time and time again. It's one of those where they just needed to, when they say, like, the cliche, they kept going to the well, but they had to go a lot of times that season, and they made it work for themselves. But yeah, I think City's standards are just higher, are just better. They're a better team. Their standards, their level that they've put forth this season is, in my opinion, a much better standard than that Manchester United team. But I think from a mentality perspective, the intangibles and the way in which they've overcome certain moments in games, one could argue that Manchester United team was and still is in a lot of ways unparalleled. So, yeah, listen, I think the treble.
Yeah, what's your verdict? You. So, are you
Manchester
saying
City?
City, or have you changed your mind?
No, Manchester City is the better team,
Oh,
but
right,
I do have a lot of respect for the treble of Man United, because I think in football it's not just the tangibles, it's also the intangibles. And I think in terms of the mental side of things, that United team can rival this Manchester City team. That I will not argue. Absolutely not. Again, if anything, if it was that, but football, as much as it's a game played between the years, it's also about talent and quality. And that's not to say that Man United team didn't have that. They had it in abundance. They were the best team out there that year, no doubt about it. But this City team standards is so far removed from anything that we've seen, and therefore I have to give the nod to them. So yeah, no sitting on the fence for me, Ayub.
I don't think I sat on the fence. I told you that the better accomplishments were Manchester United, and I'm quite careful using the word accomplishments. But it's as I said, you were right. I was wishy-washy in that first response by saying, but it was clear, because I differentiated between accomplishments and who is the better football side. So I think the viewers and anybody who's making a comment on this needs to identify from what lens they're viewing the achievements. Mine is quite straightforward. Sport is competition. It's challenges. So I view it. That's the prism from which I view. So I'm quite clear and confident in my assessment that it's Manchester United.
That's fair. And that's a good note to perhaps end on.
Yes.
No, brilliant. And you alluded to it there. I mean, look, those watching this episode, drop us a comment. What are your thoughts? Which treble is the more impressive one? And more than happy for you to comment on whatever kind of lens or angle that you speak from. But it'd be great to get the feedback. It is it's an interesting topic, isn't it? It's not been done on these shows obviously since 1999, and two incredibly worthy teams. I think City have come close, no doubt. If you remember, Liverpool last season had the opportunity to win all four, having played every game possible. To them having obviously won the two domestic cups and played in the Champions League final and taken the Premier League race to the final 10-12 minutes famously. So yeah, drop us a comment. What are your thoughts? Which treble winning team was better? Ayub, that's a wrap for us, unless you'd like to do next week's lottery numbers. What is that something?
If I won't tell anybody, I don't want to share those winnings.
Yeah, let's quit whilst you're ahead. Let's stay 1 for 1, 100% strike rate. No, brilliant. Fantastic, Ayub. Thanks for joining and giving us your views. Very interesting topics. Hopefully, again, we'll be recording again. We're recording this on Tuesday evening. We'll be recording again Friday, hopefully Friday, discussing a few topics. Who knows? Maybe the Manchester United takeover saga is complete by then. It's been going on for quite some time. Kylian Mbappe also in the news. Will he leave? Does he want to leave? Does he not want to leave? Does he want?
It's about time he leaves.
Yes,
playing a real football league.
Yes, we know what your views are on the French league, Ayub. Thank you. But brilliant. Yes, that's a wrap from us. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. Again, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please subscribe, give the episode a like, and again, comment. This is a very interesting debate. A lot of talking heads giving their views. It'd be great to have some feedback. What's your thoughts, our dedicated viewers? Which treble winning team had the better achievement, Manchester United in '99 or Manchester City in 2023? But yes, until the very next episode, hopefully we shall see you then. Until then, stay safe.